Chapter 5 Crisis of Churches. Year 0001, December 16th.
It was neither the destroyed ruins he'd left behind so recently, nor was it quite the same as the bustling metropolis he'd seen during his brief days as an eco-terrorist. This Midgar was an unfinished monolith, with scaffolding everywhere, and entire sections of the plates still missing. Even the very heart of the city, the Shinra building itself, didn't seem as if it was quite finished, quite as refined as he recalled it. He stared up at it now, and was struck again by a sense of déjà vu. He could only remember being here once, ready to storm the heavily guarded building to rescue Aerith. Now Cloud was going to march in like he belonged, and in a way he did. Cloud let out a minute sigh as he glanced sideways at Zack, who was a few feet away, and tried not to think that he was nearly within arm's distance of a certain silver-haired man. What were they going to do now? Cloud certainly couldn't return to his squadron with Connolly. It would be obvious that he had no clue where to go, who his teammates were, or what needed to be done. On the other hand, he couldn't exactly go with Zack anymore. He wasn't a soldier, and they had separate duties for the regular troopers. All he could do at this point was trust that Zack had things in hand. At least now he could wash his hands of the whole Chocobo fiasco. The last few days had been some of the most stressful ones in Cloud's life. Bar the 7 days, he and the rest of Avalanche had waited for the world to end. Thanks to the chick's near-frantic desire to remain close to Sephiroth, Cloud had been forced to keep the Chocobo he was riding close behind Sephiroth's during the trip. There had been no real question about Sephiroth carrying the chick himself. Cloud hadn't minded keeping the chick on hand, but he had minded the forced, close proximity to the one man he wanted to be as far away from as possible. At least Sephiroth had seemed as uncomfortable with the whole affair as Cloud had been, though Cloud didn't know if that was more from being forced to ride a Chocobo than anything. Despite Sephiroth's general unruffled appearance, Cloud had seen a faint crease on his brow more than once, and each day when they mounted up he'd become engendered in a stare-down with his bird. It had only served to heighten the absurdity of the entire trip. And then there was Zack. Zack, who was never more than a Chocobo length away, riding behind Sephiroth, and who Cloud couldn't even bring himself to talk to over his own discomfort. He'd watched Zack, though, through most of the ride. He'd been a helpful distraction of the buzzing, heavy presence of Sephiroth. If Cloud weren't so attuned to the birds, hadn't known how to work with them so well, he might have been jealous of Zack's quick and easy adaptation to the mode of transport. Zack seemed to take to it like a natural, though he certainly wouldn't have made a good jockey. He was too heavy built, too tall. But Zack rode the bird, one hand on the reins, the other loose and ready to grab his sword if he needed to, and his legs bent to absorb the jouncing shock of the bird's stride. His head had gently been tilted towards Sephiroth, and Cloud had a feeling he'd been conversing, or Zack had been nattering. He'd never gotten quite close enough to hear if he could help it. Whenever Veery had fallen asleep in Cloud's arms, he dropped back as much as he dared to put some much-needed distance between himself and Sephiroth. He hadn't fallen back into the crutch of Zack's personality again, though he dearly wished he could. It was too risky, with Sephiroth now obviously aware of him, and the entire team being on edge from all the stress. They'd been forced to camp at night, and though it had been mostly uneventful, Cloud had been subjected once again to the surreal picture of Sephiroth interacting with a baby Chocobo. During their first night, as soon as Cloud had released him, Veery had immediately taken off across the camp to where Sephiroth was sitting, separate from the rest of them, and talking with Zack. Zack had been alerted by Cloud's surprised cry, and had nearly burst a lung laughing at the sight of a little grubby ball of fluff, chirping happily in Sephiroth's lap. For his part, Sephiroth looked downright startled, and unsure what to do with his new companion. There had been an awkward interlude, as Cloud tried to retrieve the errant chick. Veery had stubbornly refused to be separated from Sephiroth again. Sephiroth had finally waved Cloud off, when the chick had used his beak and claws to scale his coat, where he had taken to sitting prioritarily on Sephiroth's shoulder, partially hidden under the man's silver hair. Cloud had dearly wanted to kick Zack as he stalked past the recumbent man. Wasn't his friend supposed to help him in situations like this? The rest of the soldiers had watched their antics mostly silently, and with varying degrees of humor and disbelief. Connolly had looked like he'd been smacked upside the head, actually, though Sparrow and Edge appeared to have bonded in their mutual amusement at the ridiculousness of the situation. Cloud had waved off any further conversation from them, too exhausted mentally to do more than curl up with his head pillowed on his pack and try to block out the sounds from the camp. After that, he hadn't bothered to try and keep the bird from an increasingly bemused Sephiroth when they stopped for the evening, though each day Cloud had been forced to use the chocobo lure materia to get Veery to leave Sephiroth's side. They'd make good time over the next few days, and finally arrived tired, extremely filthy, but triumphant, at Midgar's southern gate, where they released the tired chocobos to return to the ranch. Veery had been happy enough to be carried by Cloud again, so long as he stayed within a few feet of Sephiroth at least. The train to the top of the plate had brought back a slew of memories that Cloud had nearly forgotten, of his time with Avalanche and the close calls they'd had. After Meteor had destroyed most of Shinra Tower, the trains had never run again between what was left of the plates and the slums below. It was a slice of nostalgia that Cloud was surprised to have missed. The thought made him look again to the building looming over them. Few people were about now, though the glow of Midgar was excessively bright after the dark stretches of uninhabited countryside they had traversed. Cloud suspected that meant it was late. It was hard to tell in Midgar, given the omnipresent gloom and the glow of the Mako reactors. Cloud glanced at Sephiroth, and Zack's back once more. Though Sephiroth wasn't anywhere as dirty as the rest of them, even he hadn't managed to make the entire trip without getting rumpled. His silver hair was disordered, and Cloud could make out small, claw-shaped muddy prints on the silver of the shoulder guards and the black of his coat. Next to Zack, who looked like some sort of rescued wild man, Sephiroth still looked impeccable. Zack clapped his hands, turned to face the troops with a little shower of dried mud falling loose from his clothes, and said,
"I'm sure you're all glad to be home, so off we go. Oh, but Cloud, you're with us."
Cloud could only feel relief at his words, though it was chased away when Sephiroth turned to regard them, and more importantly, him. A slightly stunned silence had descended over the bedraggled crew until Gibbs reached forward and slapped Cloud on the shoulder as he headed off. Edge dropped a hand on Cloud's helmet and gave a little shake as he followed. As the troopers filed past, Jack patted his shoulder, saying,
Good luck, Cloud."
Connolly stopped just before walking out of sight and called,
"I guess I'll see you soon, Cloud."
and then he was gone. Cloud stared after them, all of his tension and relief subsumed by the shock he felt at the encouraging farewell. He would have thought they'd be glad to be out of his presence and the wildness that had attached itself to him. Cloud didn't have much time to dwell on the strange behavior as Zack moved towards him. Ahead of them, Sephiroth strode away towards the glassy front doors of the Shinra building. Zack hovered a moment, then smiled crookedly at Cloud.
"Come on, we're taking you to meet Director Lazard."
Leaning in close, he whispered,
"He's head of soldier right now."
"A head of soldier?" Somehow Cloud had always felt it was either the president or Heidegger, or maybe even Sephiroth, who'd been in charge. It made sense, though, to have a dedicated person for it. He couldn't quite wrap his mind around anyone giving Sephiroth orders, however. Veery wriggled in his arms, anxious to keep up with his desired human, so Cloud quickly started forward and brought his other hand up to prevent the chick from falling out of his grasp.
What do I need to do?"
he asked slowly to Zack. It was more of a question of if he might miss something due to his missing memories than what would be expected of the meeting. If all Cloud had to do was play the clueless trooper, he could manage that much. Anything more, and Zack would see how poor Cloud's acting skills were.
Just be polite and let Sephiroth and me handle it,
Zack said in an undertone, even as he sent a cheeky wave at the receptionist stuck working the night shift before following Sephiroth up the nearby stairs. Zack had only gotten a shocked, distracted raise of a hand in return, Cloud noted.
Don't worry about it too much. Just keep your head down and Sephiroth will take care of everything. Lazard might be head of soldier, but well, this is Sephiroth we're talking about. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, though most people consider this good news, but he's taken an interest in you.
He gave Cloud an incredulous look, and laughed lightly as if to lighten the impact of the news.
I can't say I blame him considering you introduced yourself with a sword.
Cloud wondered if Zack knew how unhelpful he was being. Cloud himself didn't have much practice in the art of politeness, tending towards blunt speech that many would regard as insensitive. He really didn't need the reminder of his enormous blunder with attracting Sephiroth's attention either. It was a normal reaction to seeing your worst enemy, surely. Cloud wasn't sure what that sentiment said about him, and dismissed it with a mental shake. Around them, a few people sitting at the streamlined glass and metal tables gawked at Sephiroth as he prowled by to stand near a bay of elevators, obviously waiting for them. They arrived just as the door pinged open. A woman stepped out, only to immediately gasp in shock and drop the armful of folders she was carrying as she was met with Sephiroth's cat-slit green stare. Sephiroth dismissed her as quickly as he'd noticed her, head tilted just enough that he appeared to be contemplating whether or not he should wait for her to move or make use of the other elevator instead. Cloud watched the effect Sephiroth had on the employees with sympathy. Sardonically, he couldn't help but think they should be more used to his presence. Zack hurried forward and scooped up the woman's scattered papers.
Sorry about that, miss,
he said smoothly.
We're in a bit of a hurry. Is this everything?
She couldn't seem to tear her eyes away from the intimidating man, looming over the proceedings with an air of detached indifference, even as she accepted the pile of folders back from Zack. With a faint grin, Zack gently pushed her to the side, as if he'd been waiting for that to happen. Sephiroth walked forward and into the elevator. Cloud found himself once again struck at the ease with which Zack integrated himself with people, even in just the few seconds he interacted with them. The woman's complete disregard of him didn't faze Zack for a moment. The contrast to Sephiroth's standoffishness was nearly tangible. Cloud hesitated for just a moment before stepping into the elevator in front of Zack. He definitely did not like this at all. A feeling of claustrophobia struck him, making him wish he could at least take off his helmet so that he could breathe easier. Sephiroth's presence was almost overwhelming in the tight quarters, and Cloud pressed himself against the wall. He had to fight against the urge to clutch his head at the over-loud buzz of reaction from the Genova cells. The combination of stresses and discomfort was making Cloud nauseous. He fought down the anxiety as best he could and brought his free hand up to caress the chocobo chick's head in his nervousness. Veery chirped happily at the attention. When the elevator finally dinged, Cloud looked up with relief. It was short-lived, as apparently they were not at their desired destination. Cloud tried very hard not to react as Rude stepped into the elevator. He nearly had the full set now, he mused. All he really needed to run into was a bright-eyed and loose-tongued Elena. If Rude was at all perturbed at sharing an elevator with Sephiroth, he hid his reaction completely. The man had a killer poker face, and the fact he wore sunglasses even inside the building did not help. He merely nodded to both Sephiroth and Zack, raised an eyebrow at Cloud, or possibly the happy chocobo in his arms, it was hard to tell, then turned to silently wait for his floor. It wasn't really fair that the Turks could still set his teeth on edge. Next to the crisp black suit, Cloud felt especially filthy, and his skin crawled with the desire to get clean. Not only that, but Rude's impeccable silence made the absence of the boisterous runner all the more dramatic. Cloud rarely saw the two Turks separately, so he felt as if the redhead was about to pop up with that damn electric stick at any moment. The next time the elevator stopped, Sephiroth moved forward and Cloud wanted to sag with relief. He followed hot on the man's heels, telling himself it was just so Veery wouldn't complain. Why had he thought it was a good idea to follow one of Zack's plans? He was going to die before the day was out. Zack and Sephiroth led the way down a short hall to an office they entered via an open, wide doorway between glassy walls covered in etched writings Cloud didn't bother to read. To their left, a small, angular desk covered with a neat stack of documents took up space, while on the right, the wall was filled with shelves of books. The director of Soldier sat behind his large desk, head bent and blonde hair spilling around his face. But upon their entrance, he looked up. Cloud didn't know what he'd been expecting, but the man sitting uneasily in the pristine office was certainly not someone he'd envisioned as the head of Soldier. Lazard adjusted his glasses and swept a look over the three of them. His gaze came to rest on Sephiroth.
Sephiroth?
Lazard, Sephiroth said calmly.
I need to speak with you on an important matter.
Cloud was immediately on guard, aware that the air was full of tension and silent conversation he was not privy to. Politics had never been his strong point. Blowing up a reactor with Avalanche had been about the pinnacle of his political career.
I see,
Lazard said slowly, and clasped his hands before him.
How can I be of assistance? There was an incident during Soldier First Class Zack Fair's mission to Medial,
Sephiroth intoned flatly,
involving one of the troopers.
Lazard glanced immediately at Cloud and frowned.
He was exposed to Mako.
It was, Cloud had to admit, baffling when Sephiroth's curt words actually seemed to lessen the tension in Lazard. An accident with a trooper on a simple mission was obviously not the first thing on the man's mind, and Cloud wondered what sort of trouble Shinra was in now. A cover-up? Or more accurately, another one? He shook himself mentally. It wasn't his problem. Cloud needed to focus on what he knew was coming and what he could change. Lazard's frown was even more pronounced. Before he could say anything, Zack did what he did best and bowled into the conversation.
We discovered the reported Mako pool, and Cloud was knocked into it,
he said earnestly, eyes wide and guileless.
Lucky it seems to have been heavily diluted by water, so there weren't many ill effects. It probably wasn't anything worse than what new recruits get, if that.
Zack's fervent explanation was to be expected, and it both explained the situation and made it seem less of a disaster than it really was. It hadn't occurred to Cloud until now, but he did wonder about the Medial mission. He obviously had no real recollection of it. Surely there was no way he'd fallen into a pool of Mako and survived. Despite what Zack said, the Mako had barely been diluted by the small stream, burning into Cloud's skin like fire. He gave a small shudder at the memory. He really hated Mako. Lazard sat back, and it was easy to see that he was holding himself cautiously. There was also a calculating, thoughtful look to him that Cloud didn't like at all.
You want to make an exception and induct him into the soldier program?
Lazard's query cut through Cloud's mental fog of thought. Had he just heard...
You want to what?
He asked sharply, unable to contain himself. In his agitation, Cloud let the chick drop out of his arms. Zack hadn't said anything about this. If it was the last thing Cloud wanted, it was to be even more closely affiliated into Shinra. He turned a stunned expression on Zack, though it was mostly lost thanks to the helmet, silently pleading for his friend to refute the statement. Soldier had once been his greatest desire. It had meant he succeeded, that he was a somebody, and that people would look up to him. Cloud had found all of that and more with his group of ragtag friends, without having to pay Shinra's heavy price. Somehow he felt that if he was forced to wear the soldier name, he would once again be hiding behind Zack's life, not living as himself, but as a marionette of what other people expected. He didn't want to be a puppet again. Out of the corner of his eye, Cloud became aware of something black moving across the floor. He turned his head just slightly and saw Veering sitting with his legs curled under him, happily cooing from atop Sephiroth's boot. Cloud had to try very hard not to turn and march out of the room to get away from both kinds of madness. Zack held his hands up, smiling disarmingly at Cloud, and gestured at him to be quiet and wait. Sephiroth had, in the same space, pulled his attention away from Lazard long enough to frown down at the chocobo chick. He did not, however, make any move to dislodge it. Cloud saw him look back at Lazard and narrow his eyes. Lazard looked a little more strained than he had before.
No,
Sephiroth said.
While he has displayed an aptitude for the sword, I have not seen any other soldier-appropriate qualities in him.
Sephiroth's words were still full of honey and poison, even if he wasn't a psychotic madman. Backhanded compliments, underlying threats, and an infuriatingly superior attitude that Cloud longed to wipe off his face. He figured he was allowed to at least have less than friendly thoughts about the man, though his agitation was obviously getting to him, because Cloud had a clear mental image of Lazard slumped dead over his desk, blood pooling on the smooth surface. Lazard gave Sephiroth a puzzled look, and the man continued.
The fact remains that he will require specialized training in his new abilities. There is a very real possibility he could injure someone, or himself, if he is allowed to flounder. He has displayed enhanced abilities,
Lazard asked. At Sephiroth's nod, he sighed faintly.
I see. And this, of course, falls only under the area of the soldier program. I suggest,
Sephiroth offered at a purr,
that to minimize fuss, we assign him to Zack.
Cloud had to clench his fists to keep himself under control, as his fate was decided over his head. It was logical, and it made sense just to stay quiet and let Zack and Sephiroth take care of the politics and regulations. But that didn't stop the feeling of impetuous helplessness. Cloud was too used to doing things on his own, being forced to handle the problems himself. Yes, he had his friends to back him up, but he was still the leader. Lazard smiled a polite, political smile.
Yes, I can see why that would be necessary. And you are willing to take on this assignment, correct?
There was something familiar about the head of soldier. Cloud couldn't put his finger on it, but the man reminded him of someone else. Perhaps it was the blonde hair, which wasn't a common hair color anywhere, really. Possibly it was his attitude reminded Cloud a bit of Reeve. Neither a greedy, corrupted politician like Heidegger or Palmer, nor a ruthless power grubber like Scarlet. Zack straightened from his slight slouch.
Yes, sir.
Lazard stapled his fingers together and regarded Zack for a moment.
You are aware you can't allow him to interfere with the rest of your work. Perhaps it would be best if a second-class soldier was assigned to him. Surely he doesn't require the attention of a first. He has shown some signs of aggression,
Sephiroth said. His gaze lifted aloft towards a point above Lazard's head, rather than at the man himself.
And Zack is on friendly terms with him. It would be best to allow someone who is acquainted with him to watch him, in case there are deviations from his normal personality. These are things someone who never met him would not notice.
Sharply, Lazard shot back.
You said he was mostly unaffected by the Mako.
Sephiroth didn't deign to answer, and after a few seconds of silence, Zack spoke up.
He had a minor case of Mako poisoning that lasted for bordering on 48 hours, but was otherwise healthy. He was able to enjoy the march here from Junon just fine. Has his state of health been cleared by one of the scientists or medical staff? He was allowed to leave Junon,
Sephiroth said shortly, tone clipped. Lazard frowned at him, obviously unmoved by the non-answer, but seemed to realize he'd get nothing more.
I will speak to Heidegger on the matter tomorrow. Be aware that this could take a while. We've never had a situation like this, but I can see the necessity of it. I will let you know when the paperwork is done. It should be assumed that he falls under our jurisdiction starting now, however.
He paused a moment, his gaze sliding over the three of them from behind his glasses before he nodded.
I'll let the matter of his health slide for the moment, but once he's officially a part of Soldier Program, I will require a full workup.
The mention of the possibility of having to get checked out made Cloud's blood run cold. He wouldn't get any nearer to the science division than he had to, unless he was armed with a sword and allowed to take whatever precautions he found necessary. Beheading Hojo was his favorite.
Sure thing,
Zack said cheerfully. Sephiroth merely inclined his head and turned to leave without waiting for a dismissal, which disrupted the chocobo chick on his boot. It walked in indignation and began to scuttle after him, causing Sephiroth to stop and frown down at it. Lazard turned a faint smile on Cloud.
I expect we'll be seeing more of each other in the future. Even though you are not a soldier, you will be a proxy of the program until such a time you are released back into the regular army. However, if you do well, I expect it to be put forward as reason to recruit you into the soldier program proper. Think of this as an opportunity.
Lazard turned his attention to Zack.
Report in tomorrow morning so we can discuss your last mission in more detail.
Cloud gave a belated salute as he realized they were dismissed, before turning on his heel to follow Sephiroth out the door, Zack behind him. He crouched down abruptly and sensed Zack nearly trip over him. Cloud ignored that as he activated the chocobo lure materia he still had on him to the most powerful lure the sphere had available. The little black chick zoomed over to him instantly, walking with delight. He scooped it up peremptorily, raising again in the same movement. He just wanted to get out of the den of wolves, and knew he was sentenced to spend the unforeseeable future trapped among ghosts and demons. A sideways glance at Zack made him amend the horror of that thought. Not all ghosts were bad, at least. Sephiroth halted before the elevator and pressed the button to call it. When the door pinged open, he merely looked at Zack for a moment, flicked a glance at Cloud, then stepped inside a second before they closed. Zack sighed and pushed the call button on the other elevator as a strange sort of silence descended on them. When the doors clicked open, he ushered Cloud inside and hit a button for the ground floor. Inside the elevator, Cloud shifted the chick to a more secure position. He felt a little bad since the chick was so singularly focused on the materia it nearly looked drugged. But he didn't want to handle its despondence at Sephiroth's absence. Cloud felt a lot better now that the immediate cause of most of his stress was gone.
I'm not sure what Sephiroth is planning, but I trust him,
Zack said, pressing a hand over his eyes tiredly. His words made him wonder what Zack did know Sephiroth was planning. Zack had been speaking to Sephiroth privately quite often on their way back to Midgar, though Cloud hadn't thought much of it. The idea that Sephiroth had plans relating to him was vaguely disturbing. Zack's continued musing drew him from his thoughts, for which Cloud was glad.
We have a few more things to do before we can bed down and get some sleep, like finding your stuff.
He didn't bother answering Zack. Within Shinra walls, Cloud didn't feel safe enough to hint at his discomfort. Zack didn't seem to mind, almost as if he was thinking aloud. A moment later, Zack brought his hand down from his eyes and seemed to have a sort of epiphany.
And that's it! Connolly! The guy who was with us and said he'd been in your squad for a while. All we have to do is ask after Connolly, and we should be able to find out where you bunked.
Cloud was glad someone had a plan. The elevator opened again, spilling them out into Shinra's massive entrance hall. There were even fewer people than before. As he hurried through the main floor, Cloud noted people were still staring in their direction. Seeing two filthy people and a chocobo in the pristine walls of the Shinra building probably wasn't a common occurrence. And Zack was a soldier. He shook his head slightly, glad again for the concealing helmet. All Cloud needed would be for the wrong executive to remember what he looked like, and then not even Sephiroth would be able to save him from Hojo's curiosity. Cloud would put that off for as long as he could. There was a metallic tang to the breeze as they stepped out of the building. Even on top of the plate, nothing would make a dent in the heavy, polluted air that surrounded Midgar in a smog. Cloud wrinkled his nose slightly and resigned himself to the smell. He was struck by a sudden thought that if Meteor never destroyed Midgar, then maybe this polluted city would continue to spread. Was he really doing the right thing? Hadn't some good come of the future? It was a moot point now. Cloud was here, and he'd already changed so much with his mere presence. Even if he could go back, did he want to give up what he'd lost all over again? Staring at Zach's profile as they walked along, Cloud already knew the answer. He had to try. He'd promised himself he'd try to make things better. And if he failed, well, he knew how to end things again. Cloud would never let Sephiroth destroy the world.
I know you trust him.
Cloud said softly, picking up the thread of conversation that he'd let drop earlier. Zach led them out of the area, directly around the Shinra building, and into the brown and grey shadows of Midgar. Cloud kept his gaze on the ground in front of him. He wasn't sure how to express his unease, since Zach's unending optimism couldn't seem to understand that it wasn't easy for Cloud to give Sephiroth another chance.
He's your friend, and I can't ask you to just throw that away because I said it might happen.
That was the last thing in the world Cloud wanted. Zach's loyalty to his friends was... It probably meant more to Cloud than it did even to Zach. It was the single reason Cloud was alive, and in the end had probably been Zach's downfall.
It's just,
Cloud shook his head in frustration, unable to express his reluctance to Zach.
I've had to fight him more times than I can remember. It was only a couple of months ago that I had to face him. He never stops, and I'm always afraid of the next time he'll come back. What if I can't stop him again? What if I fail again?
He shut his mouth, teeth clicking together uncomfortably. Cloud hadn't wanted to turn this into another emotionally charged sob story. Zach shoved his hands deep into his pockets, features serious, but still wearing a slight smile.
I know, Cloud,
he said.
I don't expect you to trust him. I don't even expect you to like him. Don't get me wrong, when I say I trust him, I mean I trust him to handle things here and now, and take care of all the paper shuffling. I also trust him to act like Sephiroth. I'm not trusting him blindly anymore. The thing is, if I start treating him like a pariah, that's only going to push him out of reach. I'm wary, Cloud, I admit that, but I'm not going to let that stop me. Whatever may happen, he isn't the Sephiroth you knew, and he might never be. He is your enemy. I don't expect you to get over what you've been through. Possibly not ever.
Zach had stopped walking now. They were tucked out of sight in the grey-brown, faintly green-tinged shadows of the streets. The golden-orange glow of a streetlight pooled at the end of the barren causeway they were following. He reached out and placed a hand on Cloud's head, leaned down towards him and grinned.
All I want is for you to remember that he isn't the same man you fought, killed, and from what I'm getting, killed again. Which, by the way, you're going to explain to me someday soon. Just like...
Here he paused and seemed to debate himself for a moment, looking oddly uncomfortable.
I'm not the person you remember.
Zach fumbled for a moment, brows furrowed with worry above the vibrant blue of his eyes. He pulled his hand back and ran it over his forehead before smoothing over the wild spikes of his hair. He turned away, gesturing expressively with his hands as he went, and said,
Anyway, if nothing else, you can trust Sephiroth to stick to the patterns you've already set him to. Until something sets him off, there's nothing to worry about. We just have to keep an eye on him.
There was something sardonic in Zach's voice there, as if he were thinking of something particular that Cloud had no notion of.
Besides, it's hard to be intimidated by a man who has a tiny black fuzzball laying claim to his boots.
Cloud let out a strangled laugh, comprised of mingled relief and disbelief.
How can you make everything sound so easy, Zach?
He shook his head, Zach's words reverberating in his mind. It was as if Zach had no demands of him, no expectations that Cloud sacrifice himself for the good of the world. The concept was almost too alien for Cloud. For so long, his existence had been tangled up in his sacrifices. To be told it was okay to be selfish was liberating, but didn't stop the welling of guilt at the thought. I can see that. There's more to him than is apparent. He glanced down at the enraptured bird in his arms, smiling softly. If I spend more time near him, I can't guarantee it will be easier. There's a reaction when I'm near him. That's hard to block out. Part of how But I suppose I should get used to it, right? A frown stole the smile off Cloud's face, but it was a frown of thoughtfulness. I don't know what to do now, though. Now that we have an excuse for me not to attend normal duties. What will I be expected to do? He reached his free hand up to tap at his helmet. I can't continue to wear this, and you know people will begin to recognize me. But I don't want to hide out anywhere either. There's got to be something I can do now. I don't know what we're going to do, said Zach. I'm not the tactical genius Sephiroth is, and we can't exactly bring him in on this, though I'm sure if we did tell him all our problems with a certain scientist, he would be terminated immediately. He dislikes the man just about as much as we do at this point. I took out Hojo once, Cloud mumbled, ducking his chin behind his scarf. But I'd be happy to do so again. It was a surprise that Sephiroth had such high antagonism for the scientist, though perhaps it shouldn't have been. Zach started walking again, hands eventually finding their way back into his pockets. The thud of his boots echoed in the silence. And, you know, Cloud, I realize you're worried about all this and want to get moving straight out. But have you ever considered just taking some time to get used to all of this? Letting yourself relax a bit, take it all in? You know, like a grace period. You're free to do that now, and I'm sure opportunities will present themselves. Until then, we can plan until we've got headaches through the Mako, and it could all shatter in a few seconds. I'll take you to the soldier floor eventually. I've got some friends there who are good about information. I'm sure if there's anything that we can use, they'll have heard of it long before us. Cloud glanced up at Zach's face, to be met by a reassuring smile. It had never occurred to him to just let things happen. He always seemed to be racing 2 steps behind everything, and now that he was ahead of the proverbial game, Cloud couldn't remember what it was like to just relax. The fact that there were other soldiers was another thing that came as a surprise to Cloud. By the time Sephiroth had risen again, they were already almost completely wiped out, and only the people's memories of Mako glowing eyes and terror being their legacy. Cloud wasn't sure how much they could be trusted considering that fact, but if Zack thought it was a good idea to use them as resources, then it was probably safe enough. I guess, he said, still unsure that waiting for any time at all was a good plan. How long do we have? Nibelheim, it happens at the start of October. The air currently had a winter chill, but it was possible that the Nibelheim mission was sooner rather than later. Cloud gritted his teeth. If it was soon, perhaps the ripples he'd caused would change things so Zack and he wouldn't even be sent along. The thought that Sephiroth wouldn't still be deployed was laughable. Hojo had planned too well for it to fall apart, even when something unexpected came up. Ahead of them, a fence divided one set of this particular sector from another. A gated-off entryway stood over the road, with both a foot entrance and one through which vehicles could be driven. Beyond the fence, long, dark, and identical buildings stood in neat, orderly rows, their entrances lit from above by solitary lamps. Closer to them, a light glowed from the small, glass booth in which a figure was hunched. From this distance, Cloud could hear the faint sounds of a static-filled radio station reporting something he couldn't make out. As they came up upon the booth, Zack raised his hand to tap on the glass. The guard behind it jerked, and nearly overbalanced from the chair he was settled in, and proceeded to gawk at the soldier on the other side.
"Hey,"
Zack said amiably.
"Night shift. Feel you, man. Can't wait to get to bed."
The guard muttered something unintelligible in response. Zack didn't seem to care, and merely carried on.
"Look, we need to get in. My buddy here has to get his stuff. He's moving to new quarters."
Then, as if he'd only just remembered something,
"Oh, yeah, and I need to find some guy named Connolly. You think you can point me in the right direction?"
the startled guard fumbled among the mess of glossy magazines on his desk, before turning to the console built nearby. The clack of keys filled the half-darkness, and a moment later he muttered,
"He, appears to be in building 7B, sir. Room 15. "Thanks. You're a real help,"
Zack said cheerfully. The guard saluted sloppily, and nearly fell over again before he managed to hit the button that opened the gate to let them in. Zack strode through, and kept walking a ways, his head tilted up to take in the large, blocky numbers and letters printed on the front of the buildings. Once they were out of earshot, he waved Cloud closer.
"It was December 10th when we shipped out for Medeal, and it's been several days since then. So if things go down next year, and we've got about, 10, 11 months?
Cloud gave a soft hum of agreement. There was still time, at least. He almost wasn't sure what he was going to do with that time. Throughout all the time spent battling Sephiroth, Genova, or just to save the planet, he and his friends had merely reacted to events. Never had they spent the time to really plan things out, at least not without their plans falling apart to outside forces. Now he had months to fill up, waiting for the inevitable to happen. It was grating, since Cloud was worried that if he did nothing now, nothing would change then either. Thinking about it, about failing again, sent a chill down his spine. Physically, he'd be able to do it, stop Sephiroth before the madman could begin his schemes again. But mentally, Cloud would break. Worse than he had from the Mako. Worse than after Zack's first death. There would be nothing left but a puppet. A body whose only purpose was to follow where the strings pulled. If he wasn't able to make things right, to save the people he loved, when he had this much advantage, then he was worse than a failure. He wasn't sure he could survive the guilt a second time. Cloud blinked as he realized they were no longer walking, and were instead standing in front of a door. Cloud glanced over to find Zack waiting patiently, with a bemused smile on his face. He hadn't realized he'd been so distracted. Cloud hoped, belatedly, that Zack hadn't been trying to talk to him. He was too used to being on his own, with only his thoughts for company. Zack would have to take the lead here. Cloud had no idea what sort of things he even owned in this time, so it was better if someone who was honestly ignorant of it asked Connolly about it. The inside of the building was just as utilitarian as the outside, though it was slightly brighter, a more grey metallic shade than the grey-brown of the outside. The lights were low runner lights at the base of the walls, giving it an odd greenish glow in the gloom. Each door had block-like numbers on them, large and pale against the dark metal. It wasn't hard to find the 5th door on the 1st floor. Zack thumped his fist against the metal. They didn't have to wait long, as there was a thump and some curses from beyond the door before it was opened, and the bedraggled features of the very man they were looking for appeared before them. Whatever Connolly had been meaning to say froze on his tongue as he gaped at them.
"Cloud? Soldier Fair." "Hey, take it easy,"
Zack said glibly.
"You weren't sleeping yet, were you?" "I just started to doze off, but it's all right. Is something the matter, sir?"
Connolly asked, looking like he would genuinely give up his much-wanted sleep if he was needed again.
"Well, Cloud's got to move to new quarters, so we came to collect his stuff. If you could just direct me towards it, I'll grab it since he has his hands full.
Zack said with a wave towards the chocobo chick in Cloud's arms.
And get out of your hair so you can sleep.
Before Connolly could say anything else, a gruff voice in the darkness said,
I'll help you, sir.
as a large form jumped down out of one of the bunks. Zack followed the beckoning shadow into the room, leaving Cloud and Connolly by the door. Connolly turned to Cloud, wide-eyed, and asked in a hushed whisper,
Did they promote you or something?
Cloud considered the question silently, internally scrabbling for what he should say. What would Zack do? No, that was a dangerous line of thought. Still, Connolly was looking at him with genuine worry, and Zack would be back in a minute. So it was up to Cloud what sort of rumors began at this point. The military was the worst gossips he knew of.
I am not being promoted, exactly,
He said lowly, keeping his voice from carrying any further than the other trooper.
Zack might be able to hear, but there was no problem there. It's just my reaction to the Mako. They want to make sure I can handle the changes.
Hopefully that would be enough to assuage the general curiosity about Cloud's sudden absence. Connolly nodded slowly, but still looked worried. Zack came back out, a duffel bag over one shoulder. Cloud nodded awkwardly to Connolly, preparing to follow Zack down the hall again.
Connolly blurted out,
causing Cloud to stop and stare in surprise.
You take care, Cloud. If you need a break or... yeah, just...
The trooper shuffled his feet in embarrassment.
We've got you back, all right?
Yeah, Cloud said, unsure where the display of camaraderie stemmed from. He couldn't imagine that loyalty among grunts was all that common, though maybe he was just too biased against Shinra to realize that it was composed of real people. Thanks, he added, after another moment's pause. It somehow felt inadequate a word, but Cloud had nothing more to offer. The walk back through the military compound was mostly silent, punctuated only by the muffled sounds of sleepless Midgar and the odd coo from Viri. Zack led the way, detouring back towards the Shinra building before heading back into the weave of streets and around to the entrance to another compound. They passed through the more highly secured entrance, where a third-class soldier on guard duty eagerly greeted Zack, calling him boss, and let them through. The building here looked more like apartment buildings. There were 3 of them situated at the corners of a vaguely triangular square, at the center of which was a monument of the same soldier symbol that was stamped on the front of Zack's harness. They were made of the same dull brown-grey stonework as the rest of the buildings on the plate. Zack headed straight across the square, for the building sitting at the pinnacle of the triangle, and opened the pristine glass door. He ushered Cloud ahead of him, through another set of glass doors which required a keycard to open, then led him to the single elevator waiting beyond.
With all these security measures, you'd think we couldn't take care of ourselves,
he muttered to Cloud as he jammed one of the buttons with his thumb.
I mean, it's not like the entire building is half full of soldiers or anything.
After he said it, Zack yawned widely and stretched. He nearly dropped the bag of Cloud's things when he waved cheekily at the security camera, pointedly watching them from a corner. Cloud agreed silently with Zack. For a building full of the most enhanced human beings on the planet, the soldier barracks were far too heavily guarded. He supposed that it was partially that Shinra valued its lucrative projects more than a dozen guild regular troopers, and also because they did not want the secrets associated with soldier to be accessible to just anyone. Soldiers had access to sensitive documents, and not all of them stayed in Shinra's main building. The elevator stopped, and Zack led Cloud out into a hallway that was just about as drab as the one in the rank and file's barracks, though the doors were spaced further along it. The door Zack made his way to looked the same as the rest of the hall, though it didn't have a number on it like the doors in the troopers' barracks. Instead it had a small nameplate next to it, which announced that first-class soldier fare was in residence. There was just space beneath Zack's name for another, which was currently empty. Another swipe with his keycard, and Zack opened the door to reveal a Spartan little room. There were obvious signs of Zack's personality. A television tucked into one corner, a rather comfortable-looking couch with a blanket draped haphazardly across it, which suggested Zack had a tendency to sleep out here rather than in his room. The low table between the two was covered with a scattering of magazines, a dated copy of Famous Garden Monthly, side by side with a dog-eared Craftsman's Monthly, loose papers, and a copy of Loveless, the covers still bright and glossy and obviously unread. On the far wall, a rack for weapons was present, a standard-issue soldier longsword taking up one of the spaces. 3 doors led off the tiny room, all 3 in various states of standing open, as if just waiting for the owner of the space to return and take up his daily routine. The apartment came as a surprise to Cloud. He'd never really sat down and imagined where Zack had lived in Midgar. Even if he had, he doubted he would have imagined the rather cramped, militaristic accommodations. There were touches of his friend's personality scattered everywhere, though, leaving what normally would have been a cold, plain room that much brighter and lived in.
"Make yourself at home,"
Zack said as he breezed in. He dropped the duffel bag on the sofa and proceeded to drop the keycard and the contents of his pockets, his cell phone, and a few softly glowing materia onto the surface of the table. Then he turned to Cloud with a grin somewhere between challenge and teasing.
"So, who gets to shower first?"
Zack's injunction for Cloud to make himself at home made him squirm uncomfortably. Tifa had said that about her 7th heaven bar. She'd set aside a room just for him, assuring him that it was his home, that he was always welcome. Cloud had tried to make the room his own. Photos from his travels, souvenirs, mechanical junk for Fenrir, or his sword used to litter the area. But eventually, he hadn't been able to feel comfortable there. The guilt that aided him made things far too tense, until it became too much. Eventually, he'd stripped the room bare and gone to live in Aerith's church. He'd been unable to find his redemption there, either. Zack's flippant question was another matter, however. Cloud didn't think he'd ever felt quite so filthy in his life, even after dropping into the sewers under Don Corneo's mansion. He glanced around the room again and spotted the open door that led to the tiled room, obviously the bathroom. Cloud turned his attention to his friend and gave a small smile.
"Flippy for it?"
he offered, gesturing to a couple of coins Zack had spilled from his pocket onto the table. Zack's grin only widened as he turned to collect one of the coins. Cloud took the opportunity to cross the room swiftly, closing the door to the bathroom just as he heard an outraged cry from Zack. Oh well. He glanced down at the chick that was still snuggled happily in his arms. The chocobo lure was still glowing softly, and Cloud figured this was probably the best place to end the spell. Fury wouldn't be able to escape the room, and the little chick was also covered in grime from the journey over. Marsh mud caked the fluffy down, and it couldn't be comfortable. With a lick of thought, the materia went dark, and Veery shook his head in confusion. Cloud set the chick down, taking a moment to strip off his filthy uniform, anxious to get clean of the road and other unidentifiable grime. Sensing another's gaze on him, Cloud paused in the act of pulling off a boot to look down again at Veery. He found himself caught in the saddest gaze he'd ever experienced. Everything about the chick was drooping and pathetic, the chocobo's eyes fixed pleadingly on his own.
"You have to get clean first. You'll feel better,"
he mumbled, turning back to his task. He knew that the baby probably didn't understand much human speech, but chocobos were highly intelligent. Both Tifa and Sid had talked to the chocobos as if they understood, and Cloud hadn't seen any indication that they didn't. A few moments' study allowed Cloud to get the shower going, and the immediate relief of warm water made him sigh. Another glance at the bundle of misery still standing disconsolately at the door had him sighing for a different reason, and he padded back over to scoop the chick up. Fury squabbled at the sudden movement, but his irritation subsided as Cloud set him under the running water. The chirps took on a delighted quality, and soon the little bird was splashing happily at his feet. Over the sound of running water, Cloud heard the door open and Zack's voice floated to him.
"Hey, Cloud, I'm putting your bag in here. I figured you might like to have some clothes."
He ignored it all for now and focused on getting blessedly clean. Using one hand to towel off his hair, Cloud stepped out of the shower, significantly cleaner and much more relaxed. He felt a splattering of water on his leg and looked down to see Veery fluffed up as he shook out the water from himself. The little bird's black fluff settled down, but still stood out and made the chick look rounder than normal. Cloud grinned slightly at the sight, nudging the chick out of the way as he strode to the bag by the door. He'd half expected Zack to withhold his clothes completely, but apparently his friend was more mature than to retaliate to Cloud's trick. Cloud let the towel drape over his shoulders as he rummaged around through the duffel bag for something to wear. Eventually he pulled out some cotton pants and a t-shirt. Once dressed, he hefted the bag to his shoulder, checked to make sure his feet were clear of the hyperactive puffball, then exited the bathroom. Zack had sprawled out on the couch, Buster Sword across his lap and cleaning equipment in hand. Cloud hesitated, feeling suddenly extremely childish for his actions. His friend had covered for him, given him a safe place to stay, and Cloud was being ungrateful for that.
"Sorry,"
he said, glancing down and away from the couch.
I'm finished, if you want to go in."
He felt foolish for stating the obvious, but he didn't know how to handle Zack in such a normal situation. There was no one to fight, no one to hide from. For a moment, he feared that Zack too would see Cloud for the failure he was, now that there was nothing else to hide behind. He shoved the feeling aside, but worry settled into his stomach like a lead ball. Zack gave a last swipe of the cloth he was using to clean the enormous sword, a look of satisfaction on his face, before he looked up at Cloud and beamed.
"Don't worry about it. I would have done the same thing to you if I'd thought of it,"
he teased. He stood up and walked over to the wall where the longsword hung. Almost reverently, Zack settled Buster's sword into the hooks obviously meant for it, then stepped back. For a moment he merely stood there, looking at the sword with an odd, wistful half-smile on his face and a shadow in his expression. His fingers lingered, just barely touching the blade, while his gaze flickered over it, examining it. When Zack stepped away, his expression immediately shifted to one of reflecting his usual boundless energy, though tinged by the dark smudge of exhaustion.
"You'd think the water would make your hair less crazy,"
Zack noted, amusement underlying his tone thickly. Zack glanced down at the puffed-up chick that leaned dourly against Cloud's leg.
"Well, anyway, I got that room
He gestured towards the open door.
ready for you while you were showering."
Zack disappeared into his own room for the moment. When he reappeared, he made a beeline for the bathroom. He paused just at the door and looked back at Cloud with an easy, friendly smile.
"I'll see you in the morning. Night, Cloud."
Cloud lingered for another minute, staring blankly at the door Zack had disappeared behind. Then he shook his head slightly, shaking further sullen thoughts from his mind, and padded over to the door Zack had indicated as where he'd be staying. The room was bare, and he wondered for a moment why no one else had been assigned here, since the facility was obviously intended for two. The bed was built right into the wall, a couple of drawers for storage in the space underneath it. Another set of drawers lined the headboard area, a storage locker above them, and a niche where a bare desk had been built across from the bed, a chair sitting tucked up against it. The bag made a dull thump against the floor as Cloud set it down next to the bed. Probably he should unpack it to the drawers intended for that purpose, but suddenly he was struck by fatigue of the last few days. He ran a hand tiredly through his hair before giving up and flopping down face first into the pillow of the bed. It was a hard, mass-produced fare, but Cloud had slept on much worse over the years. An imperious walk from the floor made him stir, and he propped himself on his elbow to peer over the edge of the bed. Veery walked at him again, flapping his tiny wings in a demand for attention. Cloud gave the chick a small frown, even as he reached over to scoop it onto the bed with him. He dropped onto his side again, watching Veery stumble on the yielding surface of the mattress.
"What am I supposed to do with you, anyway?"
he asked the bird quietly. Veery ignored him, traipsed to Cloud's side before sitting down, tucking his legs under himself and snuggling against Cloud's ribs. Cloud ignored the ticklish feeling on his stomach, bringing a hand over to pet at the soft down, still damp from the shower, again. He never even felt himself fall asleep. Year 0001, December 17th. It only took a single little beep to drag Zack kicking and screaming from the realms of sleep. Sometimes he hated that his vocation meant that he needed to be aware enough at all times to wake quickly when summoned. Now that he was awake, he'd never managed to fall back asleep again. He rolled out of bed and staggered over to grab his cell phone off the desk where he'd left it, flipped it open, thumbed over to his mail, and found a reminder from Lazard. Zack sulked a moment and considered sending a rather angry reply. It wasn't worth it in the end. Zack brightened immediately as the thought occurred to him. He was taking Cloud to meet Aerith today, whether Cloud liked it or not. Zack sent a sidelong look at the clothes he'd left lying in a pile half in and half out of his room. His mud-caked pair of boots were with them. He turned around, pulled a spare pair out, and dropped them on the floor, then began pulling out the rest of the various parts of his usual black uniform and dumping them on the edge of the mussed bed. He'd ask Cloud later if he wanted to take some fire materia and see how well Zolom and swamp-encrusted clothes burned. Once dressed, and his bed neatly made, Zack grabbed his boots and meandered out into the little main room. He paused long enough to put his boots on, then looked towards the still open door and the other room. Speaking of Cloud, Zack sidled over and peered inside. He had to immediately stifle a laugh at the sight of the blonde curled up with the chocobo chick. Veery had his head resting on Cloud's neck, beak settled into the bright strands of his hair. Zack considered waking him up, but decided to let him be for the moment. Instead, he finished getting ready, grabbing his buster sword, and left the apartment. He still had to go see Lazard to make his report, after all. Guiltily, he knew it would give him a chance to be away from Cloud's half-worshipful stare. No matter how much it bothered him, Zack could understand and didn't blame him. He still wouldn't sneeze at the chance to escape it for a little bit. It just made him uneasy. He really didn't want to think anymore on why that look was there. Today, Zack had decided, was going to be a happy day. He'd told Cloud to relax and get used to life, and Zack was going to make sure he did one way or another. First things first, duty called, and he could pick up a few things for Cloud to make adjustment to his new life easier. With that in mind, any guilty feelings were buried under the sense of mischief and enjoyment in life. Zack fairly hummed the entire way to the Shinra building and right through the front doors. As soon as Zack stepped into the main lobby, a voice called, "Hey, Zack!" He paused, mid-step, head swiveling towards his caller, and grinned widely at the receptionist at the desk across the room. Lazard could wait a few seconds longer, and if anyone asked, he'd had a bit of a lie-in getting his new roommate settled. "Layla! Nice to see that pretty smile greeting me again," Zack caroled as he made his way over to the desk. The other woman working at the desk with her shot him a friendly grin as well, and Zack winked at her. "I've just spent about a week with nothing to look at but helmets and Sephiroth. Neither of those things smile." "At least you don't look like something they pulled out of a sewer anymore," Layla shot back, shyly. Zack's face fell, and he rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. "You saw that, did you?" No. But Lainey was working the shift last night. I only just replaced her, and you know how we like to trade gossip." Zack laid a hand over his heart, looking hurt.
That's just cruel. She didn't even say hi.
To his right, the other receptionist, he was pretty sure her name was Catherine, snorted.
I wish I'd worked last night, if only to get a chance to catch a view of Sephiroth.
Shame Jake had a stomach bug.
Well, I'm sure your kid is more important than any glimpse of Sephiroth, Zack drawled. He wasn't even pretty last night. Had mud on his boots and everything.
Layla covered a choked laugh. I doubt his fans will believe that, and... Her awkward cut-off made Zack blink, though the sound of a throat being cleared behind him made him cringe a bit.
Always ruining his day. Hey, Stang. I didn't know you liked to chat up receptionists,
Zack said, as he turned to meet the Turk's flat stare. Tseng watched him for a moment longer, and Zack did his best to keep from jumping guiltily.
He wasn't supposed to meet Tseng for something, was he? He was pretty sure the only person he was keeping waiting was Lazard, who was a lot more tolerant, and the message hadn't demanded he put in a direct appearance anyway. I merely wanted to ask about the mission to the mines,
Tseng said.
Huh? Why? It wasn't that exciting.
The way Tseng looked at him told Zack that he wasn't getting out of the escort and conversation so easily. He half wondered if Lazard had arranged it, but that seemed a little too bastard for the man.
All right, well, I need to go talk to Lazard anyway. I suppose I can regale you with the sordid tale. Bye, you two.
Tseng inclined his head towards the receptionists while Zack waved and said, Ladies.
Smooth,
Zack said as they backtracked, leaving the pair laughing and heading up the stairs.
See, I knew you were really just there to chat up the girls. Kathy's taken, though. I think she's seeing that chick that gives out those experimental potions ever since her kid's dad hauled off out of town. Why am I not surprised you know so much about their dating pool?
Tseng asked. Zack would have taken it as an insult. Still might be just to be contrary, if he hadn't seen the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of Tseng's mouth.
Hey,
Zack said placidly.
I'm not the gossipy one. That's Kunzel.
They were quiet until he entered the elevator, and Zack punched the button for the 51st floor.
Still don't know why you want to know about the mission to the mines. It really wasn't anything special.
Tseng gave a quiet chuckle, eyes on the rising numbers as he waited.
I don't. I merely wanted to ruin your day.
Zack turned and gaped at him, unable to help himself as he spluttered. Tseng merely gave him a dark-eyed look of what Zack decided to classify as pure, malevolent amusement, and said,
I believe this is your stop. That's just cruel,
Zack noted morosely. He stepped off into the hall and glanced back at Tseng sadly.
Here I thought we were friends. It's a Turk's job to strike most cruelly,
Tseng said indifferently,
hands clasped behind his back. And most subtly. Soldier are the ones who provide the distractions.
Zack was still laughing quietly to himself as the door closed, and the elevator bore the Turk away. Zack couldn't say that Tseng didn't have a sense of humor buried under that perfectly pressed suit and business-like air. He still couldn't help but wonder if he ought to be wary of the encounter, though. Zack's expression darkened for a moment, before he shook it off and made his way towards Lazard's office. He had better things to do with his day than brew up conspiracy theories about Turks. They created conspiracy enough for anyone on a good day, just by making a person wonder where they got their suits cleaned. Like he always did, Zack walked into Lazard's office like he belonged there. He had almost been expecting to run into Sephiroth lurking around, but it seemed he had disappeared into the depths of the Shinra building again. A shame, really. He needed to be socialized. It was probably for the best, though. Zack was pretty sure Cloud was destined for an aneurysm if he had to deal with Sephiroth constantly for much longer. Hey, sorry if you want to be here earlier. It was a rough week, so I sort of crashed hard, he said, only to realize the only thing facing him was an empty chair. The large metal shutters on the window behind Lazard's desk had been retracted, giving a panoramic view of the unfinished Midgar. Zack had all of a second to wonder if Lazard was out, before he spotted the man standing off to the left of his desk. Lazard finished sliding a book back into its place on the shelf, and turned towards him with a welcoming smile. It isn't a problem, he said easily. My morning is relatively free for a change. It seems whatever happened in Medial has the science department well and truly distracted. Normally, they're so much more interested in new soldiers. Zack shrugged and merely watched Lazard walk back to his desk and take a seat.
I don't really see what's so interesting.
As far as he knew, the truly interesting specimen wasn't even going to go near the labs if things went to plan. Even if Zack was willing to hand Cloud over for whatever purposes, he was pretty sure Cloud would take most of them down before letting it happen.
It was just a bunch of angry birds with claws.
Lazard chuckled and clasped his hands atop his ink blotter.
You have a talent for understatement.
He paused for a moment, gaze trained downwards towards his knuckles.
Now about this mission. Down to business it seemed, and Zack just barely controlled a flinch. This mission could really only have gone worse if there had been more fatalities. Resigning himself to it, he began, We arrived on time and just fine. It was only after we located the site that things started to go wrong.
As he went over it, each word seemed to leave him feeling cold, and if he embellished certain things and left others out, well, will he ever know? He felt overwhelmed all over again, and all he could think of was Cloud's trusting gaze as he looked at him like Zack could make the entire world right just by being there. It was a pressure he wasn't totally sure he was ready for. Zack wondered if Angeal had ever felt like that, and found himself once again wishing his mentor was there. He could do with sitting down in the bench on the soldier floor, Angeal with a copy of his favourite Famous Gardens Monthly. He'd have adored Aerith. And Zack gulping back some sort of sports drink after a training session. He finished his little tale with a,
And that's all that happened. We arrived back in Junon, and Sephiroth up and decided to do the mine thing, and here we are. I think we brought half the swamps back with us too.
Lazard sat back in his chair at last, a little frown on his face.
This won't go on your record. You seem to have handled the situation admirably after it went downhill,
he said. There was no sense of happiness like Zack expected should accompany those words. He just felt kind of tired, and more than a little drained. It reminded him a little too much of his fateful promotion to first class. He summoned up a grin anyway.
That's good to hear.
Yes, Lazard noted, returning his smile politely.
I believe it's one more step towards your dream.
And if that wasn't a shot where it hurt.
Well,
said Zack blithely,
you did say the impossible dreams are the best, right?
Lazard chuckled and nodded, his eyes drifting towards the computer on the desk.
Ah, that reminds me. I need the name of the infantryman. It's Cloud. I don't know what his last name is, actually.
His mind was a total blank on that, and, come to think of it, he was pretty sure he'd never asked.
It just wasn't all that important. That's fine. It's quite the unique name, so it should suffice. You're free to use the rest of the day as a personal day.
The way Lazard turned to his computer was obviously a dismissal, so Zack let out a breath and turned his heel to leave. He just stepped by the short wall that cut off Lazard's office from the hall when he remembered the question that had been burning him since he woke up.
Oh, hey, I had a question.
Lazard's typing stopped, and he turned towards Zack again, clearly waiting. So Zack hurried on.
I was wondering, since Cloud's technically a sort of honorary soldier now, can I get him a sword?
Lazard frowned for a moment, his hands fiddling with his glasses.
I don't see why not. It certainly isn't against any regulation. However, it may be inadvisable to give him one from the stores. He isn't technically on the soldier budget.
And the soldiers broke enough of those on their own for them to be kind of expensive, Zack was sure. Zack nodded thoughtfully, and then brightened as the idea occurred to him.
That's fine. I know what I can do about getting him one, but he's going to need an addition for a harness to hold it. Like one of the soldier harnesses if possible. That should be fine. I'll send a note. And you can check supply pod 6 within the hour.
Thanks. Feeling good about his morning despite the odd downsides, Zack hurried back to the elevator. He had some time to kill, but that was fine. He could get some breakfast while he waited. Inside the elevator, he punched the button for the 50th floor. The trip was short, taking him just one floor down, and a couple of seconds later, Zack stepped out onto the rather open floor plan. The room had plenty of counters and tables, a few vending machines nearby, and was filled with early bird soldiers. In the Shinra building, there were 2 cafeterias for the staff. The one on the 30th floor wasn't as fancy as this one,
the so-called executive cafeteria. Most of the bigwigs preferred to have their meals in their offices, though Lazard was apt to appear every day for lunch on the dot. The rest of them weren't so keen on mingling, so in reality, the executive cafeteria was more of a soldier and occasional Turk cafeteria. Nobody really seemed to mind, though he'd heard a second complain that he wished it had a bar too. Zack was pretty sure it was for the best that it didn't.
It was a nice setup regardless. Something like a mixture between a restaurant and a self-serve sort of deal, with a kitchen through a set of swinging doors at the far end, and a wall near them taken up with a variety of slots containing pre-made meals. At this time there were already several seconds and thirds lounging around in the tables, eating breakfast. Zack could hear voices from the kitchen as the soldiers invaded the space to make use of the appliances. Breakfast was the busiest time, as they all knew better than to be loitering around when the president's personal chef flew in to make him lunch. Zack had unfortunate personal experience with that one. He'd been unlucky enough to be hanging around once, and had been spectator to a blow-up that had occurred. Someone had stolen the man's knife, and he'd insisted it was a Tonberry. Zack still wasn't sure how he'd gotten roped into going to look for it, but the days spent in a cave filled with little green beasts was enough to make sure he didn't want to see another Tonberry in his life. He never did find the guy's knife, though a bunch of knives found Zack's shins. Zack made sure he was never around when the chef was there from there on out. Crazy bastard. The thoughts were oddly amused even in Zack's own head. He used his Shinra employee guild card to pay for a few fresh bagels, an orange, apples, Benora white or not, still made him flinch a little, and a bottle of water. He'd have to remember to grab something for Cloud before he left as well. Zack had just made his way over to his favourite table by the wide window overlooking Midgar when his phone rang. Quickly he swung Buster Sword off and leaned it against the nearby wall, then set his breakfast down. As soon as he fished his phone out and answered it, Aerith cheerfully chimed in his ear. "Hello!" "Hey!" Zack said, his phone trapped between one shoulder and his ear as he yanked out a chair and sat down. "I was hoping you were awake already." "Of course I am, silly," she said. "The flowers won't take care of themselves." "Of course not," he said cheerfully, and reached for the little clear plastic container his bagels were in. As he fumbled to get it open, he ended up knocking an arm against his water. He had to lunge to grab it as it attempted to roll away. "Whoa! Get back here!" "Zack, what are you doing?" Aerith asked, sounding slightly suspicious and a bit concerned. "Getting ready to come see you, of course," he chirped. He set the bottle back down before he selected a bagel. "We got back to Midgar late last night. Oh, and I hope you don't mind if I bring company. Remember my friend you talked to? I promised I'd introduce you." "I don't mind at all," she said, and her tone of voice left Zack no doubt that she meant it. "I have to go. It's time for breakfast. I'll be in the church right after I finish." Zack grinned widely. "I have to get a few things done and get my new roommate up. Then we'll be down. See you soon." He snapped the phone closed after Aerith's cheerful goodbye and set into his own breakfast. After he'd worked his way through the bagels and had begun to work on the orange, company arrived. "Hey, Zack. I heard you were back, but I didn't think you'd be here this early." Zack grinned up at Kunzel, around the slice of orange he'd just popped into his mouth. "I had a meeting with Lazard this morning, and now I'm killing time for a bit." Zack deflected Kunzel's hand as his friend reached for a piece of his orange, and quickly shoved that piece into his own mouth. Kunzel settled for frowning at him in a disgruntled manner. "What I can't figure out," Kunzel said slowly. His hand was creeping towards Zack's food again, Zack noted. Cheapskate. Just because Zack had a slightly better paycheck. "Is what you want with a chocobo. Even a black. Well, unless you're vain enough to want one to match your hair." "Nah, it's not mine," Zack said happily. Kunzel went still and frowned. "Sephiroth?" "You bet! He makes a terrible mama chocobo, though, so we're babysitting." The look on what Zack could see of Kunzel's face was priceless. He was gaping. Sadly, it passed pretty fast. "Wait, we?" Kunzel asked, clearly bewildered. Zack suddenly grinned a fiendish delight. "Oh, that's great. You don't know, do you? Do I know something before you for once?" Given, that was sort of cheating since Zack was directly involved, but that had never stopped Kunzel in the past. Even when Zack was knee-deep in Shinra cover-ups,
His buddy always seemed to know first. He leaned back in his chair and just drank in the feeling of knowing what was going on first. It was an awesome feeling, though the fact that Kunzel would probably never figure out some of it put a damper on it. It wasn't quite as fun when you could never rub it in the guy's face. Kunzel stole the rest of his breakfast, and Zack let him. Let it be a sop to his pride. "At least I know there's something to find out," he said at last. "Don't look so smug. I'll probably know more about it than you by lunch."
"Sure," Zack said breezily, and knew his compliance only made Kunzel more curious. There was no way he'd be able to pick apart this insane, sordid little tale. Even if he did manage to find out a great deal, well, there's no one else Zack would trust more with the information.
"Anything interesting happen while I was otherwise occupied?"
He got a frown for the topic change, but merely grinned. Zack wasn't giving Kunzel a chance to try and pry more information out of him if he could help it.
"You know that third that idolizes you? The one you helped out a way back?" "Yeah? What about him?"
Zack dearly hoped he hadn't gone and gotten himself killed,
Or held hostage again, or whatever. The last thing Zack needed right now was chasing after an errant third-class soldier who'd gotten in over his head. Apparently he managed to get through his last mission almost perfectly.
Kunzel's wellspring of information carried the conversation easily enough, though they were occasionally interrupted by soldiers stopping by to say hello to the resident first class with an actual personality. Before he knew it, Zack had glanced at the clock to find his hour wait was over, and heading towards an hour and a half. His chair squeaked against the tiles as he jerked upright from his comfortable slouch.
"I need to get going."
"Busy day planned?" Kunzel asked, his voice perfectly conversational. Zack recognized the tone, and stood hurriedly. Buster Sword was on his back in seconds, and he grabbed his trash.
"I'm on standby for the rest of the day, so I'm going to enjoy myself. Later."
Trash in the trash can, and another container of bagels and a bottle of water in hand, Zack headed for the elevator. He had no idea what sort of food Cloud liked, but the bagel had been delicious earlier, so if he didn't eat all of them, Zack would. He had a pretty fast metabolism, even before the Joker decided to introduce Mako into his system. Floor 49 proved quiet, though Zack could hear voices floating from further along the wide halls. He strode over to the nearby door with the golden glowing lines and text declaring itself to be the briefing room, and keyed it open. As he stepped inside, the murmur of a pair of voices cut off abruptly. Zack glanced towards the end of the room to find a pair of thirds loitering near the mission board. The familiar redhead leaned against the frosted glass that cut the smaller foyer off from the briefing room proper was easily recognizable. It wasn't hard to guess who his dark-haired companion was. As Zack strode further along the supply pods towards the pair, he lifted a hand in greeting. "Edge, Gibbs, Fair." "Hey, Zack." He sent them a sidelong glance as, balancing the food he was carrying in one hand, he hit the button to open the pod number 6. The gears whirred quietly. "You two aren't jumping straight back into work, are you?" Edge snorted and ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Hardly. We were just—" He waved a hand vaguely. "Talking about the last mission," Gibbs drawled, "and lamenting that we'll never get to do anything that exciting again." "I'd almost say you should count yourself lucky," Zack replied. Sometimes he wished he wasn't involved with so much excitement, but then he'd be bored, and a bored Zack was no one's friend. "Oh, good." Lazard had pulled through for him, he noted, retrieving the harness sheath. It'd allow Cloud to carry one of the soldier longswords easily. "What'd you get?" Edge asked, stepping closer to get a look. "What do you need that for?" "I was hoping it was a cure in disguise," Zack said blithely. "I really need a cure, you know. It's pretty bad that I'm a first and still using an old cure." "What's going to happen to Cloud anyway?" Gibbs asked. "That would be telling," Zack answered, tucking the contraption of magnets and straps into his belt. "But I'm charged with looking after him for now. He's pretty keen with a sword, and Lazard says it's fun if he carries one around." "Keen, he says," Edge grumbled. Zack turned as the pod hissed closed, and gave them a grin. "Yeah, keen. Real natural. Anyway, I need to go kick him out of bed, since I was nice enough to get him breakfast and a present." "Really, Fair?" Edge said, freckled nose wrinkled in a wry humour. "Do you listen to a word you say?" Gibbs elbowed him hard and rolled his eyes. Turning on his heel, Zack marched for the door without a backwards glance. "If I stopped being entertaining, you'd off yourself in boredom." The grin on Zack's face remained as the door hissed closed behind him, and he headed for the elevator.
It stayed the entire way back to the apartments. Zach's good mood hadn't abated in the least when he sauntered in. It was quiet in the apartment, and quite obvious that Cloud was still sleeping. At least one of them had gotten to catch up on some shut-eye. Zach figured that Cloud probably deserved it the most. This whole thing couldn't be easy on the guy. With havoc in mind, Zach wandered into Cloud's room. Setting his offering of food on the empty desk, Zach leaned over Cloud and gave his shoulder a light shake. Fury walked at him in dissatisfaction as the move upset his comfortable position. "Hey, sunshine! The chocobo is crowing! Time to rise and shine!"
Cloud stirred awake slowly, and when he focused on Zach, he didn't seem to quite understand what he saw. Zach watched in amusement as Cloud proceeded to stare blankly for another moment, before understanding kicked in. He jerked upright a second later, and froze at the startled walk the action caused. The chocobo chick struggled to his feet, where he had been knocked over as his pillow moved away. Cloud glanced wide-eyed up through his bangs at Zach. Good morning?" Cloud asked after a moment of silence. On the bed, Veery trilled a note that nearly matched Cloud's hesitant words.
"Good morning,"
Zach crowed, completely unperturbed by Cloud's hesitancy. Reaching back, he groped around and snatched up the food he'd brought. He waved it in Cloud's face as he leaned down towards the blonde with a wide grin.
"I brought breakfast."
Zach cast a glance down at Veery as the chocobo wobbled uncertainly towards the edge of the bed and stretched to peer up at the container. He reached out just in time to keep the chick from toppling to the floor.
"I hope you still have some greens left. You think we can find more around Midgar? Or will we need to make a trip back to the ranch soon?"
He didn't wait for a reply, merely dropped the container into Cloud's lap and made for the door. He was half out when he stopped, leaning back.
"Oh, and Cloud, get dressed. We have places to go."
Cloud looked almost traumatized sitting there. As Zach stood in the middle of the living room, he could hear Veery's imperious walks, followed shortly by Cloud's voice.
"If you keep making so much noise, I can't see that guy ever taking you."
There was a pause, some more walking, and the sound of Cloud fumbling around.
"Greedy."
The quiet tread of his new roommate, along with the warble of the frustrated chocobo chick, had Zach turning around to grin at Cloud.
"Lazard said I'm on standby today. No missions. Isn't it great? And you don't have anything to do either."
In a few strides, he stood beside Cloud, and Zach dropped a gloved hand heavily on his head to ruffle his sleep-mussed blonde hair.
"That means we've got an entire day to ourselves, and we're going to make the most of it. And I've got a bit of a surprise I think you'll like."
He pulled the harness sheet from his pocket and tossed it to Cloud, who caught it with a perplexed expression. Zach turned away and made his way over to the weapons rack on the wall.
"I remembered you seemed to prefer swords, and that made me think. Hey," I said to myself, "if I'm supposed to be teaching Cloud how to handle his new Mako-enhanced abilities, then doesn't that mean I should be teaching him like a soldier?" This seemed logical to me, so when I went to Lazard, I asked him and he agreed. It'll make a nice cover-up for your sword skills. Of course, I couldn't just appropriate soldier equipment, but...
Zach reached up and carefully lifted his old longsword off its peg. Turning around, he twirled it neatly in his hand as he held the hilt towards Cloud. Zach scratched the back of his neck, feeling faintly abashed.
"It's just my old longsword from before Angiel gave me the Buster Sword. But it's better than nothing. I don't think you would want to go unarmed."
That sword had served him well, gotten him through a bunch of things he'd never expected to face. It was the only reason he'd really hung on to it, and now he hoped it could be put to further use. Cloud took an involuntary step back, face paling. Zach waited it out, couldn't help but wonder what ghosts Cloud was seeing to put that look on his face. He didn't take the reaction to heart, couldn't bring himself to when he had the barest inkling of what Cloud was going through. It might make him more than a little uncomfortable to have Cloud alternately looking at him like a ghost and an idol, but Zach refused to blame him or make a fuss about it. Some things just reached a little too deep. The stilted movement was punctuated as Cloud jerked in pain and turned to scowl down at the chocobo chick. Veery was rearing back for another peck. Cloud jerked his leg out of the way just in time, sending the little chick staggering and warbling in frustration. "Damn it," Cloud hissed under his breath, frowning unhappily at the bird. Then he reached out a hand, hesitancy apparently gone, and hefted the sword easily out of Zach's grip.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I need to feed this guy before he decides to try eating me again.
Squatting down, Zach reached out, grabbing the bundle of down in both hands and pulled him away from Cloud.
Why don't you go finish getting dressed first, then...
Ow! Veery had nipped his fingers, then did it again when Zach refused to let go of him.
Hey, take it easy, Zach scolded the bird, wiggling a finger in his face.
Veery grabbed a hold of Zach's finger and clamped down. Luckily, his gloves kept the tiny bird from doing any real damage. Zach sat back on the hard floor and pulled the chick closer, tugging lightly. Veery tugged back, momentarily distracted from his search for food by the new game. Cloud's footfalls retreated towards his room. Zach got his hand free and clamped his fingers firmly, but gently, around the bird's beak to keep him from nipping again. He could swear Veery was glaring at him from the absolute indignity Zach was subjecting him to.
Are we sure that Sephiroth doesn't have a thing for chocobos? Because I swear this bird has his glare.
He winced after he said the words. Zach could almost hear Angeal's scolding tone for saying such a thing, even as he looked faintly amused with the verbal diarrhea that often came with Zach's more hyperactive moments. Sometimes Zach wondered how Angeel had ever put up with him.
You know what? Forget I said that, Zach said with a grimace. At least I know you won't ever snitch on me to Sephiroth, Cloud.
I get the feeling you do that often enough yourself. Cloud's rueful voice floated back to him. Do I need to wear a full uniform again?
Nah, you should be fine where we're going. Any sign of Shinra on you is likely to get nasty looks as it is. But since you'll be with me, it'll be alright,
Zach said distractedly. Veery had managed to wriggle free and resume the game of tug-of-war with his glove, and it was work to keep the chick from pulling them right off.
Just keep your head down while we're on the plate, and if we go to the Shinra building itself, with this cover we can explain away the Mako glow in your eyes well enough. Though we still better be careful about it.
The bird gave an aggravated little sound when Zach pulled away, and Zach frowned at him speculatively.
Say, Cloud, how did you get so knowledgeable about chocobos? I raced chocobos back then. We needed an alternative transportation, and, well, I bred a few when things were calm.
Cloud returned on the tail of his explanation and crouched down next to Zach. He offered the few greens he had left.
Here, strip off a few small pieces, like this, and feed him slow. It will hopefully tide him over until we can get a supply of them.
Zach did as he was told, nearly getting his fingers gobbled right along with the greens as Veery attacked them eagerly. Cloud stood then, though he continued to look down as he brushed his hands off on his pants.
Golds are more biddable than blacks, so we'll probably have our hands full with this guy.
Zach grinned lopsidedly as he chuckled Veery under the chin. The chick was less voracious now that the edge had been taken off his hunger, and willing to wait longer as Zach carefully shredded more of the greens.
That's pretty cool. I never really had a chance to do much with chocobos, though I've had a couple of missions that put me out there by the ranch. I had to kill some monsters around there once and got to see some of the birds. I bet we can find someone willing to supply us with stuff for this little guy today.
It would just be inconvenient to have to go to the ranch every time they needed stuff for Veery. Zach would bet that there was someone down in the slums, or even on the plate, that was willing to keep them supplied for a little gill.
Don't worry,
Zach said to the happily cooing chocobo, as Veery gaped his beak open in obvious demand.
Uncle Zach will make sure you get what you need.
He gave a choked laugh.
Hey, Cloud? Would this make you Veery's babysitter? Or do you think it's like you've entered unplanned parenthood with Sephiroth?
Cloud made an odd choking sound that had Zach glancing up in time to see him fumble the boots he'd just picked up. Zach had the strangest feeling that Cloud was contemplating chucking one of the grimy things at his head. Instead, Cloud focused on securing the longsword onto his back a little awkwardly.
I know of a place in the slums that keeps chocobos. Or kept them, at least,
Cloud said at last, his expression carefully blank. He was obviously avoiding Zach's question.
If not, there's other things that can be substituted. Not as good, but it's a good thing we're heading down there then,
Zach said happily, then dropped the remaining greens on the table as Veery turned his beak up to the next offering. He snatched up the container of bagels that Cloud had left on the table earlier, briefly rubbed his hands against his pants, then pulled a couple out. He held one out to Cloud,
and bit into the other himself. It was just as delicious as the ones he'd had earlier. "You ready to go?" Cloud took the bagel with a sort of resigned look. Zack got the feeling that Cloud was one of those waif-like types that barely ate. That just wasn't good for someone as active as they were, Mako or not. A moment later, Cloud glanced down, and Zack followed his gaze to find that Veery had taken up position on one of Cloud's boots. With a faint smirk, Cloud hefted his boot up, and Veery gave an affronted walk as he was launched into the air. Cloud caught him in his free hand easily. "I'm ready," he said, nodding at Zack. "Good. Now eat your breakfast," Zack said cheerfully, and led the way out. The walk through Sector 8 to the train station in Sector 1 went well enough. For the most part, they were ignored by the people out in the early morning Midgar gloom. A few people called greetings to Zack, or sent odd looks towards the chocobo Cloud was carrying. Zack occasionally pointed out something to Cloud, and expanded on his thoughts with much gesticulation that sometimes required the use of his entire body to get the point across. But otherwise, they had a quiet stroll through the sleepless city. Zack sprawled out comfortably in one of the seats once they were ensconced on the train. Cloud sat down next to him. "Morning, Zack. Going to see your girlfriend again?" Zack glanced up to see one of the Shinra hired conductors coming towards them, and sat forward with a grin. "Absolutely." He chanced to glance at Cloud from the corner of his eye, and saw him pale, eyes going wide. Zack might have felt bad, but he just didn't. Somehow, Aerith had a way of making everything seem a little lighter. Just a little better. And she'd been someone in Cloud's life that he'd lost. It would probably do some good for him to see her. Not to mention he'd promised. Maybe he should have given Cloud some warning. But then again, maybe it was revenge for last night. The conductor laughed lightly. "Well, you have fun. I've got work to do." "Hey, I worked all week, and it involved things a lot worse than wandering up and down a train," Zack called after the man's retreating back. Beside him, Veery gave an odd little warble. Cloud apparently hadn't quite roused himself from his stupor. He had slumped forward in his seat. Veery slipped from his loosened grip, and now pressed his beak against Cloud's cheek in worry. "Stop worrying about it," Zack said lightly. "Nothing's going to go wrong." Cloud sent him a slightly miserable look and said nothing. Zack didn't mind that the rest of the trip was in silence. He was looking forward to seeing Aerith again. Besides, he could use the time to think about what he needed to say to Cloud before he let them meet. Given the circumstances, Zack thought he had a right to be a bit uneasy about the upcoming introduction. A short time later, as they wound their way through the slums, Zack's earlier speculation proved true. While Cloud was directed a number of wary, mistrustful glances, nothing particularly hostile came their way. A few people even greeted Zack. They were used to him now, after months of his frequent visits to Sector 5, and some even seemed to like him. Or at least he hoped so. When Cloud's footsteps dragged the nearer they got to the church, Zack didn't comment on it. However, when the church did loom out of the gloom, pale, but oddly warm and welcoming for a stone building, Zack slowed his steps as well. He came to a complete stop at the base of the wide stairs up to the front entrance, turned, and grabbed Cloud to drag him back several paces to the side. Around them, the piles of rubbish were tinted grey and brown in a lack of direct light. The plate above them created an intense, claustrophobic atmosphere that still often left Zack uneasy. A few people were picking through the junk not far away. Still gripping Cloud's arm, Zack brought himself on eye level with his friend and, after casting another furtive glance to make sure they were ignored, murmured, "Look, I don't know what Aerith was like when you knew her, but she's not—" Zack cut his words off with a strangled sound of frustration. He released Cloud and ran his hand up over his forehead roughly. He turned, paced away a few steps with hands swinging at his sides before he turned back. "She doesn't know a lot about what I do, okay? Aerith she... Zack, for once, was at a complete loss for words. No matter how much thought he'd given this, it was just impossible to form into words easily. "I don't want her to worry too much, and—" Zack's mouth twisted into a frown, and he crossed his arms over his chest, gazing off towards the pillared, almost glowing line where the dark monolith of the plate finally gave way. Being too serious wasn't working for him. You know, when I first met her, she didn't realize I was a soldier. She told me that she thought soldiers were scary. Brutes who just like to fight and kill. He was sort of afraid he was going to prove her right one day. But this wasn't about underestimating Aerith's ability at kindness, or even her strength. She'd certainly gotten used to him. She's kind of sheltered, and I don't want to rush her into things, so... He turned to look at Cloud again. I'd prefer if she doesn't find out what's going on for now. She's strong. I know she is. Aerith is... inexplicable, so he let it fall. He had a feeling Cloud understood. But she's not the woman that you talk about. Not yet. And Zack still had no idea how to explain this to Cloud, who seemed to be having trouble separating even Zack from his ghosts. Anyway, we should keep it on the down low. You're just my friend who's getting introduced to her as far as she knows, which is true enough. Cloud didn't look like he was following everything Zack said, but after a moment he nodded, lips settling into a line of grim agreement. Zack remained there looking at him, and had a brief pause to wonder if he was making a mistake. He shrugged the thought aside after a moment. There was no way this was going to be a mistake, because he wouldn't let it be. Neither would Aerith. Zack turned on his heel and strode towards the sweeping front steps of the church, Cloud falling silently behind him. Cloud's steps paused at the doorway, while Zack walked between the old wooden pews, pretending there wasn't a certain hurry and eagerness in his steps. He couldn't help but breathe in the scent of old wood, dust, and that light, floral scent that came from Aerith's carefully tended patch of flowers. She looked just as she always did. She seemed to glow as the light hit her white sundress and haloed the fall of her hair and ribbon. Zack returned her welcoming smile with a slightly foolish one of his own. "Still saving the world one monster at a time?" Aerith asked as he stopped a few feet away from her. Zack could tell she was teasing him. "Oh yeah, of course. Took out an entire herd of hippogriffs. Saw a Zulum skewered. You know, the usual," he said airily, waving his hand as if it wasn't a big deal. It probably was, but it didn't feel like it anymore. None of it seemed too terribly impossible now. Just another day's work as Zack Fair, one-day hero.
She laughed, light and soft and sweet, and Zack's grin grew. She took a few swaying steps towards him, then leaned to the side to peer towards the door. "Don't be shy," she called. "You can come in. I don't bite." Zack felt foolish, because he'd pretty much forgotten that Cloud was there. Coughing uncomfortably, he turned and, feeling for all the world like a little boy who'd been caught out, waved Cloud forward. "Aerith, this is Cloud." "Hello, Cloud," she said, almost as though it was automatic and she were laughing at some secret joke about the two of them. "He's been behaving himself, hasn't he?" "I'm standing right here," Zack grasped mockingly. "Hello, Aerith," Cloud said softly. A small smile quirked the corner of his mouth. In his arms, Viri squirmed a bit, warbling out a high-pitched greeting of his own. Aerith gave a little hum and stepped around Zack. He watched her, amused, as she paced down the aisle towards Cloud, only to stop less than a foot away. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "You were ill the last time we spoke." Zack crossed his arms, rested his weight on one leg, and watched the two with a fond smile. He was curious to see how Cloud would react to Aerith's careful extension of kindness, and hoped that in some way she could clear away some of the cloying shadows that clung to his friend. Cloud, he noted, looked extremely uncomfortable, yet at the same time so very happy. It was almost painful, and Zack was glad he'd brought him here so soon, was glad he hadn't decided to tell Cloud he didn't have to come. Right now, he felt like he'd made the right choice, and that settled something nagging and uneasy inside him. Cloud ducked his head, his reply slightly muffled. "I'm fine. Zack's been taking care of me." "I just bet he has," she said, tisking as she sent a teasing grin over her shoulder at Zack. He gave a little encouraging shooing motion to her, that made her give him one of her secretive little smiles. Aerith reached a hand out and tugged Cloud further into the church. "Come on, don't just stand there." "Oh!" She jerked back in surprise. Veery had snapped at her. Not quite in contact, but his displeasure was obvious. "Veery, stop that!" Cloud snapped gently, frowning down at the bird. "Aw, it's adorable!" Aerith gasped, bending over to get a better look at the chocobo. "Hello there! It's Veery, right?" she cooed, offering her hand again to the petulant bird. Cloud looked absolutely worried, Zack noted with faint amusement. Veery considered the offered appendage for a moment, before chirping imperiously and butting his head against her fingers. Zack wasn't surprised. Who didn't take to Aerith, after all? "The poor thing looks a little sad, though," Aerith said, gently stroking the soft, downy head. "Here, put it down. I bet it would like to see my flowers up close. How on earth did you get such a small chick to follow you?" Together, the two of them set the chocobo on the floor. Veery looked up at Cloud for a moment before trotting off further into the church where Aerith's garden lay. "He's not mine," Cloud mumbled. "I'm just taking care of him for now, at least." "That would explain it. You should take him back to his mother soon, Cloud," Aerith said, straightening up and brushing off her dress. Cloud closed his eyes, looking chagrined. Zack couldn't stop the peculiar little wheezing sound that had Aerith sending him a curious and slightly confused look. "Sorry," he choked, holding up a hand. His eyes were watering with an effort to contain his hilarity. "Just thought of something funny." His eyes met Cloud's over Aerith's shoulder, and it was everything Zack could do not to collapse into fits of laughter. "Did he knock himself sillier on the way back?" Zack heard Aerith ask. "I didn't see him hit his head, but he marched through quite a bit of swamp. He might have caught some sort of brainworm there," Cloud replied. Zack sent him a hurt look that wasn't very effective through his amusement. "Don't worry, Aerith," Zack said once he had himself under control. "We'll be sure he gets back to his mom soon enough. Right, Cloud? We just have to look after him for a bit until things are settled." The whole trip back was pretty hectic. Then, noticing the ball of black fluff out of the corner of his eye, Zack nudged the chick with his boot. "And don't you go tearing up Aerith's flowers." Veery tilted his head, looking at him imperiously out of one eye, then stretched his neck forward to nudge one heavy bloom with his beak. In a flash, the little bird had darted back down the aisle, tiny clawed feet pattering against the hardwood, and hid behind Cloud's legs. A second later, he popped his head back out and began to creep back towards the garden, round little body low, tiny wings spread, and neck stretched out in an obvious stalking posture. Aerith's laughter was muffled by her hands. Zack backed up slowly and collapsed on the nearest pew with a faint thump. A slow sort of smile, content and easy, spread across his face as he watched the bird edge curiously around the garden. Veery occasionally poked a flower with his beak and sent what seemed like a sly glance towards him as if he were testing his limits. Zack occasionally made a face at Veery, which sent the chick skipping backwards, and wondered if he ought to feel silly. Then the chocobo seemed to give him a look, opened his beak, and went to chomp down on one flower. Zack jumped up with a sharp sound in his throat that sent the bird skittering off. Zack had the oddest feeling he'd just been played by a bird. In an effort to express his concern, he half turned towards Aerith and Cloud, only to catch sight of Veery sneaking back and trying it again. Zack took a few steps towards him, and the chick darted off and ducked under a pew. Before Zack knew it, he was embroiled in a furious game of keep-away with the chick who was giving odd little chuckling sounds in delight. "Get back here, you!" Zack yelled, trying to grab the chick only for Veery to escape under another pew. He barely noticed Aerith's increasingly amused laughter. "Zack," he heard her say, "this is just like when you got your wallet stolen." Zack sat back on his heels, his hand braced on the seat of the pew, and grinned widely at her. "You mean our first date?" She nodded, eyes bright from her laughter. "Maybe I should help?" He never got the chance to respond as he made another lunge for the chocobo when he darted for the flowers again. Zack's boots skidded on the floor as he tried to keep from overbalancing into the plants himself. "Oh man, this is embarrassing," Here I am, a first-class soldier, and I'm getting beat by a little tiny chocobo. Zack paused, glaring at the bird across the patch of flowers. Veery watched him with eager yet wary eyes. Behind him, he heard Aerith murmur, "You'll have to tell me all about how you found the little guy. He's just precious." He could hear the laughter in her voice as she stumbled over her words in her effort to get them out around her amusement. "You found him first," Cloud said. Zack would have turned to gawk in surprise at his teasing if he hadn't been trying to get around to Veery before he ripped up one of Aerith's plants. "Oh, you!" Aerith cried. A moment later, she crouched beside Zack, and attempting to coax the little bird out from among the plants. There was still a faint, rosy flush on her cheeks. "Veery," Cloud called, voice soft but carrying in the still air of the church. A black head popped out from the middle of the garden, bright eyes turning in his direction. Zack used the distraction to try to nab the chick, but had to concern himself too much with not stepping on the brightly blooming flowers. Veery darted back onto the floorboards, claws scrambling noisily as he trotted happily up to Cloud, chirping proudly and ruffling his feathers in satisfaction. Zack turned in time to see Cloud scoop the bird up, while Aerith fell to a fit of soft laughter again. Even Cloud was wearing a little smile. Gratefully, Zack dropped onto the floor, removed his sword, then let himself fall back to sprawl out beside the flower patch. He wasn't breathing hard, though he was certainly putting on a show of being tired out by it all. "I'm glad I could entertain you both," he drawled. "That bird is evil. Maybe you were right about his owner. Clearly he exudes so much evil that it's corrupted the little furball."
"Oh, be nice,"
Aerith chided. "I'm sure the poor thing is learning all his bad habits from you." Zack lifted his hand dramatically and let it fall on his heart as he cringed, wounded. "Aw, Aerith," Zack said, drawing her name out to a near whine. He let it go a second later. "We need to get the stuff to take care of Veery, so I figured down here might be a good place to start. Well, that and I did promise to introduce you." Zack grinned up at her from his position on the floor. "You want to come with?" Aerith put her hand on her chin in a great show of thinking. After a moment she said, "I suppose I should. It wouldn't be fair to make Cloud look after you and the baby." She held up a hand to forestall a reply. "But first I need to finish tending the flowers." "Oh, don't let us get in the way," Zack said easily. "I never get between you and your flowers." She was shaking her head at him, even as she crouched down in the dirt on the other side of the little garden from him. Zack's smile slid from bright and teasing into something softer, as he watched her through the forest of nodding white and yellow petals and green, leafy stems. Not far away, he could hear Cloud moving to sit down on one of the front row pews. As the silent anchor passed him, Zack could feel the remaining tension of the last week or so drain away, as it always did when he was here. Being in Aerith's presence just had that effect on him.